In this video, we're going to take a look at local variables and talk about their scope. So what is a local variable? A local variable is any variable that is defined inside a method. They are known as local variables. Let's define scope. What is scope? Scope is the part of the program where the variable can be referenced. Another way to think of it is where the variable can be used. What section of our program can we actually use that variable? I often like to say, where does this variable live? Or how long does this variable live? And here's the answer to that. The scope of a local variable, meaning a variable declared inside a method, starts from its declaration, wherever we declared the variable, and it continues to the end of the block that contains the variable. A local variable has to be declared before it can be used. You can declare a local variable with the exact same name multiple times in your program, as long as they are different in different blocks of code that aren't nested inside of each other. But you cannot declare a local variable twice in any block or inside nested blocks. So if you have a block inside a block, you can only use that variable once. Let's look at some examples. A variable declared in the initial action part of a for loop header has its scope for the entire loop. So when we declare I here, the scope of I starts from where it was declared, and it was declared in this for loop right here, and this for loop lasts from where the curly brace opens the block till the curly brace ends the block. So we can use the variable I anywhere between here and there, and that is the scope for I. Later on inside of our for loop, we declare a variable called J right here, and J can be used anywhere between the spot where it was declared and the end of the block. And here's the end of the block. So J can be used anywhere in here until the end of that block. And that's the last time we can use it. So the scope of J here is smaller than the scope of I. We can use I anywhere in the for loop. We can only use J after this line until the end of the block. Okay, so the lifetime of a variable starts when it's declared and lasts till the end of the block in which it was declared. So we can do things like this. Here's a for loop that uses a variable called I to count from 1 to 10, and it's going to x plus equals I for each one. I don't really care what it's going to do. It works just fine. Here's another for loop that also uses a variable called I. I wish they wouldn't use that light blue font. It's kind of hard to read. But for, we declared I again. But this I, its lifetime was only from where it was declared at the top of the for loop, and from this block, or this opening curly brace, to the end of the block with this curly brace. Once that for loop is complete, this variable I disappears. It gets blown out of the water. It no longer exists. So there is nothing wrong with us using I in this next for loop. It will create a new variable called I in a new place in memory, and we can use I again in the second for loop. Here's something that we can't do. We have a block of code here. Here's method 2. Here's the opening brace, and here's the closing brace, and we declared I inside this method. Okay, so the scope of this I lasts from where it was declared all the way to the end of its block, which is right here. That means this for loop, because it's nested inside that same block, we can't use I again here because we already have an I that's within the scope of this block. Okay, so that's important. These two are completely separate blocks of code, and it works okay. But in this one, this I is in a block that is nested inside another block. So we have to be careful about that. Here's the correct method. Let's see what's going on with this. All right, so this one works just fine. We have a method here called correct method. X declared equal to 1, integer y declared equal to 1. We declare I inside this for loop, and we're going to do some calculations using I inside of that loop, and the for loop ends. So the scope of I ends with that curly brace. We can declare I again and use it again. Not a problem. Let's look at this one. Public static void incorrect method. So we have an integer x set to 1, an integer y set to 1. We declared I here that's going to exist inside this for loop from here to here. And then, oh, look what's happening. We declared integer x inside this for loop. But remember, this x that we declared up here exists all the way to the end of the matching curly brace down here. So that means it also exists inside this for loop, because the for loop is inside the scope of this block where x was declared. We cannot declare x again right here. So be careful about that. You can't declare a variable of the same name if it's inside a block of code that's nested inside another block of code where that variable already exists.